Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're living at. What I'm really going to cover today is section 1304 of Title 21 Code of Federal Regulation, which covers records and reports of registrant. And this is what DEA, the Drug Enforcement Administration, through their Diversion Control Division, they're the people that go into a pharmacy or they go into a registrant. And the purpose of their visit, whether it's announced or unannounced, is to determine that there's been no diversion of controlled substances, and B, to look at your required records. Okay, and also with a retail pharmacy, they're looking at the security of your controlled substances because the public is in your pharmacy. And the other element is the due diligence of a pharmacy when they're dispensing controlled substances, especially for opioids, to ensure that there's no diversion of those products. So for today alone, I'm going to cover 1304, which is records and reports of registrant, and really the title that we started with was the perpetual inventory versus a continuous inventory. And if you read 1304, by the time you get done all the way from section 0.01 through 0.55, your head will probably explode because there's so much controversial statements in there that you just have to be able to rely on what is written. And this is where I come into play when I start interpreting these regulations. Now, not every diversion investigator, a DEA diversion investigator, knows everything about these regulations, okay? I do, because from day one, when I spend my 12 years in DEA diversion in Philadelphia, I always paid attention to what you are required to do in an audit, whether it's a manufacturer, distributor, or importer, exporter, analytical lab, pharmacy, doctor's office, and so forth. So this is one of the areas that I really want to cover today. and it all begins with, it shall maintain the records and inventory required. Well, that's great, okay? And it tells you that you have to keep one set of records to account for controlled substances in any activity. That's correct. And it requires you to maintain 2 years of records. Now, 2 years of records for a DEA inspection, but you also have to take a look at what your state board of pharmacy says. Because, for example, in New York, you're required to maintain 5 years of records. And that regulation comes through the Department of Health, their Bureau of Narcotic Enforcement. Okay, so what happens is DEA and B&E agent comes in, and you have 2 years of records for DEA, but you don't have 5 years of record for the B&E agent. Well, DEA, what's that?
What's a B&E agent?
B&E is the Bureau of Narcotic Enforcement.
Okay.
Within the Department of Health in the state of New York.
Okay.
They're the people that do the investigation. They're like the counterpart to DEA diversion investigators.
Okay.
So what happens is you don't have 5 years of records. So the B&E agent might cite you for that, but DEA also can cite you for that also, because you're required, when you get your registration, one of the things that you agree to is to comply with all local and state regulations for controlled substances. So now you're not only in violation of B&E, but you're also in violation of DEA regulations.
Wait, so let me just get this straight. So because you're in violation of the state regulation with B&E, you're automatically in violation with DEA, because the regulation is that you have to be compliant with the state regulations.
Correct.
Wait.
So now let's talk about these inventories, okay? One of the things that DEA diversion investigators will do is, like I said, they come in to determine that there's no diversion, but at the same time, what they will do is they would audit some of your controlled substances. Now, it used to be a time where DEA would only focus on Schedule 2s, but now they focus on Schedule 3, 4s, and 5s also. So, for example, the number one drug on Schedule 4 is tramadol, followed by the benzodiazepines like alprazolam, lorazepam, clonazepam. Those are benzos. And they also would focus on Schedule 3 narcotics, such as buprenorphine patches that is used for patients that are opiate dependent and as part of their therapy, which they're allowed to do. Doctors are allowed to write and pharmacies are allowed to fill such a prescription. So they would even go as far, okay? And I tell pharmacists every time, even your Schedule 5s, you should be looking at, your cough medicines, because there's a big market for cough medicine. You get this, your cough medicine with codeine in it, so you, on the illicit market, you can probably get about $20 an ounce for that, okay? So there's a need for that out there. So never ever not look at your cough medicine, especially in your pharmacy. So with all that said and done, their audit, all right, normally starts with the initial inventory. Now, you're required, and when you open your pharmacy, you have an initial inventory, which is all your controlled substances on hand. If you're not buying this pharmacy, you're not going to have any controlled substances on your first day of business. So you would have a zero. Well, every 2 years from that date, you're required to do a DEA biannual inventory, all right? And it says, at least every 2 years. You can do a biannual inventory every year, all right? And at some point, I might be able to discuss a little bit more about biannual inventories, but they will use your biannual inventory for the initial inventory on their computation chart. So the computation chart is two halves. The left side is what you have to account for, and the right side is what you accounted for. On the left side, what you have to account for is your initial inventory, which they will use your DEA biannual inventory, then plus all your purchases, all right, plus anything, any controlled prescriptions that are returned back by a patient or never picked up and put back in stock. You have to also take that into account, all right? Go ahead. No, you're muted. That's okay. You can stay on.
I didn't know people could return medications. Is it,
Well,
I know part of the opioid effort is when people have unused medications, they want people to return them so that they can be destroyed. Is that what they're basically returning them for?
what happens is it's in the pharmacy for will call, okay? Waiting for the patient to pick it up. The patient decides not to.
Right.
Doesn't want the medication. So it's still in the possession of the pharmacy.
Right.
The pharmacy can, under the regulations of DEA regulation, put that controlled substance back in stock.
Right.
Okay. But when you put that back in stock, you need to maintain a record of what you're putting back, returning back. And then you reverse the charge that you charge the insurance company. Because if you don't, sooner or later, the insurance company, the BPMs will come around and knock on your door. And one of the first things they want to know is, what did you ever return back in stock, to see if you billed for that, So that's what you have to account for. On the right side, what you accounted for, DEA will do a closing inventory. Okay. They will fill out a form that says DEA closing inventory. It has the drugs, the number of containers, and total dosage units. Now, what they don't do is they don't list the controls by NDCs, the National Drug Code, okay, which is provided by the FDA. So if you ever look in the side of a bottle, you'll see a barcode, or generally they'll have an NDC, what they'll call an NDC code. And then they'll have the pharmacy owner sign the form saying this is what was on hand at the time. Okay. Now they'll request from you is a dispensing report, what you have dispensed. And they will also take into account any expired drugs that are in the pharmacy that are waiting destruction. So if they're in your pharmacy and you have controlled substances that are expired, make sure they know that they account for those, because if not, you're going to have an issue on your numbers. And then they'll ask you for your records from your reverse distributor, anything that you sent back for destruction. And it's either for Schedule 2s, you'll have a Form 222, or for Schedule 3 through 5s, you will have an invoice. And then also they will include any theft or loss that you reported to DEA on a DEA Form 106. So what you accounted for includes the closing inventory, the dispensing report, records from your reverse distributor, and any DEA Form 106 that you submitted within that audit period. Your audit period will start on the date that you do your biannual inventory, okay? And they will end on the date that they come in and do a closing inventory. So that's your audit period. So what happens when pharmacies don't do a biannual inventory correct, all right? Normally, and this is how this is what the records or regulations require you to do. First page should include the name, address, and the DEA number of the pharmacy, the date on which the inventory was done, and whether the inventory was done before a beginning of business or close of business. So in essence, on the beginning of business is what was on hand at 12:01 a.m. And then on close of business is what was on hand at 11:59 p.m. Now, what happens a lot is pharmacists will do their inventories during the day when there's already been dispensing. So they'll go into the shelf, they'll count that, but they won't add what's already been dispensed. And then they'll call it their beginning of business.
So wait, well, let's back up a second. Mm-hmm. So what you're saying is they do it in the beginning, they do it in the middle of the day, and right. They put that as what's supposed to be in closing, but they don't include what has been dispensed throughout that day.
Correct. They write it up as the beginning of business. Mm-hmm. So it's, they say, for example, 11 o'clock, or at 3 o'clock, they might start doing it and they call it as close of business.
Okay.
But
close of business was 2 hours later or whatever.
And 2 hours later, it's the pharmacy's closing, and those 2 hours you did dispensing. So now your numbers are not going to come out right. Okay. Because
at the close of inventory, it would have been different than when they opened up the next day.
Correct. Yeah. So really, the close of business, like I said, it's 11:59 p.m. Okay, not 5 o'clock, not 5 p.m. when you close the pharmacy. The close of business, according to DEA, is 11:59 p.m. So
should they be doing it after the actual pharmacy closes?
Yes, they should do that, or do it before you open. Mm-hmm. I have many pharmacists will come in at 7 a.m. into their pharmacy and do the inventory, and their pharmacy will be open up at 9:30 or 10 o'clock.
But if they do it at 7 a.m., they can call it the closing inventory.
No, they call it the beginning of business, not the close of business.
Right. That's what I'm saying. So at the closing of the day, you've got to do it after you close. You should be doing it after you close.
Correct.
And then
After
the
you stop
opening one, you
dispensing.
could do it before you actually
Before
open.
dispensing, right? So you can call it before dispensing or after dispensing.
Got
And
it.
DEA wants to see BOB or COB on that first sheet.
So
And-
how many pharmacists did you say get caught up in this problem of doing their inventory at, let's say, like you said, 3:00, and then the numbers don't add up? The numbers then don't align with the opening inventory.
Correct, because it happens so many times. And believe me, when I see, a pharmacist calling their biannual inventory as beginning of business, and they put the time at 11:15 a.m. Well, wait a minute. You did your inventory 11:15 a.m., but your pharmacy opened at 9:00 or 9 a.m.
Mhm.
So for 2 hours and 15 minutes, you've been doing dispensing.
Right.
So you have to add those quantities if you're to your dispensing or to your inventory report.
Right. So this is something that you're saying that trips up a lot of pharmacists. So what are the associated fines or consequences of this problem?
Well, what happens is when remember that their biannual inventory is used by DEA as the initial inventory, the first day of
Mhm.
business. Okay. So if you counted 300 dosage units of, say, oxycodone 10-325, right? 300 dosage units. Okay.
Mhm.
But you already dispense 150 dosage units. So your inventory should have been 450, not 300. Okay. So you got to remember that the left side is what you accounted for. So he's only accounting for 300, when in reality it should have been 450.
Mhm.
Okay. So when you look at the dispensing report, the dispensing report will not have that. They will have it, but they won't have it because they're going to be short. They're going to be short, or they're going to go over. It just varies on what you put on there. So if you really had 450 on, say, January 1st, well, when you did that inventory, well, the problem is the fact that there's 150 that you haven't accounted for.
Okay.
And that's where your problem is going to occur, because on the other side, it's going to show it as being there and being dispensed, but you didn't count it as being in your biannual inventory. So now you're going to be short, or you're going to be over, depending on, how you're doing your inventory report. But so what the DEA regulation in 1304, it says that you can, for a pharmacy, you have to be exact on your Schedule 2s, and you can estimate on your Schedule 3, 4s, and 5s. Okay, so this is where I say exact count versus estimated count. Estimated means that you don't know exactly what actual quantities. So your 1,000 count bottle, you're looking at it and you say, well, I have 700, but in reality, you have 800. Now the computation chart DEA is going to do is going to show you're over 100 tablets, because you only had 700 when you did your biannual.
Mhm.
Or if you say that you had 800, but in reality it was 600. Now you're short 200 tablets. Okay. And in the eyes of DEA, any negative number, any shortages is diversion on their eyes. Okay. And any overages is record keeping errors. All right. So when they say you have to maintain complete and accurate inventory, at the same time, they're saying to you, well, you're a pharmacy, but you can estimate. And what I would say to you is don't estimate. You know, don't estimate on your, especially on your inventory. And a lot of times what happens, and I see this because I've done, you know, I've done inventories in pharmacies. They have more than one bottle open. So now you might have 400 in one bottle and maybe 300 in the other. So what do? They just put them all together in one bottle.
And that's when they estimate, because they figure they know how much is in each bottle.
Correct. Yeah. Instead of, you know, okay, if you're going to have 2 open bottles, right, and you got 200 or 300, and you got a counting machine there, pill counting machine, put them through the pill counting machine and come up with your quantities. Okay. Mm-hmm. You're not going to ruin the quality of those controls. Make sure in your counting machine, you should always wipe the tray before you empty your bottles into the tray. And what the tray does is it takes into consideration, it starts counting the number of tablets, and then it comes down to a lower tray that you can, you know, put on the side until you do a complete inventory of what's in that bottle. Now you have an exact count. Okay, so so if you maintain a complete and accurate inventory, your results are going to be that you have zero difference. And like I said, and then what the other thing I see with this biannual inventory is that the first pages you cover with all the information you need. Then you have to put in your Schedule 2 inventory, right? Separate from your Schedule 3, 4s, and 5s. All right. So what I would tell pharmacists is do your cover sheet, do your Schedule 2s, include your expired drugs on your Schedule 2s. You can identify them as expired. And then do your schedule, and then you put in a sheet, and then put in your inventory for your Schedule 3 through 5, and then do a last sheet that says end of the inventory. Okay. Now, this is the other area where they go wrong. When they're doing the inventory, they're looking at oxycodone 10-325s, 400, right, or 350. Right? They're not saying the quantities of that container, but the regulation says you're required to provide the drug strengthened form, you know, the quantities of the container, the number of containers you have, and total dosages in those containers. And that's what you should do. And many a times wholesalers will have that information. You can ask them. If not, do an Excel spreadsheet. I have them. I provide pharmacies all the time with the Excel. So you have your drug strengthened form, the quantities, and I'm sorry, the NDC. Don't forget the NDC. The quantities in the container, right? The number of containers, and the total dosage units of the containers. So if you have 100 count and you have 4 containers and you had 350, that means that you have 3 sealed containers and 1 container including counting 50, having 50. So that's what you have, you know. And it's so important to put the NDCs down, and I'll tell you why. Is because you're required to put that information in there, but B, if you commingle all your oxycodone 10-325s, when DEA does an inventory by NDCs, now what happens is you don't know how much of what quantities for a particular NDC you have. So a pharmacy, what they do is they will use one NDC, but bill for another NDC. Instead of going into the computer and changing the NDC, right? They don't. They just leave it there, but use another NDC. So when DEA is doing it by NDCs, now you have a shortage of one NDC and an overage on the other NDC. Now you got 2 violations because you're not only are you short, but you're over. and that's usually the issue in the pharmacy, I mean, I always tell people to use barcoding. Okay, barcoding, you can never go wrong with barcoding, but again, you're don't estimate, because if you estimate, when DEA does a computation chart, when they audit your controlled substances, especially on your Schedule 3, 4s, and 5s, you're going to have an issue. And the same thing.
What happens if they point it out and they say there's a problem? You say, but the regulation says I can estimate. What do they say?
Yeah, but then they use the famous word. You have to maintain a continuous inventory.
I was going to say, I'm still confused on the difference between perpetual and continuous.
Right. In the regulation, sorry about that. I thought I muted this.
Mm-hmm.
In the regulation, it says every inventory in 1304.04 says every inventory shall contain a complete and accurate record of all controlled substances on hand on the day of the inventory is taken, and shall be maintained in written form. Okay. But with that same in 1304.21a, it says, it talks about that you're not required to maintain a perpetual inventory. So 1304.21a, it says you have to maintain an inventory, but it tells you that you don't have to maintain a perpetual inventory. Well, if you want to have a complete and accurate inventory, right, you have to have complete and accurate. You can't have a perpetual inventory.
So you're saying basically the regulations are totally contradictory.
Oh, absolutely.
So just to be safe, stick with exact inventory.
Yes. And it reads this way. Every registrant required to keep record pursuant to 1304.03 shall maintain on a current basis a complete and accurate record of each substance manufactured, imported, received, sold, delivered, exported, or otherwise disposed of by him or her, and each inner liner and seal inner liner and unused and returned mail back packages, except that no registrant shall be required to maintain a perpetual inventory. Now, what does that mean? What does that mean? It's okay to not worry about your controls? You can do it, and you can estimate? No, I wouldn't do that. I would maintain a perpetual inventory, because when you maintain, whether it's electronic or paper, when you're maintaining a perpetual inventory, what you're doing is, and especially if it's electronic, and a lot of times pharmacists don't know that their software can be linked with your supplier's software, where whatever you purchase, it goes right into the dispensing software or the prescription software. So it'll always give you the count. And when you fill in a prescription, you can always determine what you have on hand versus what the inventory says you're supposed to have. Now, if what happens a lot is a pharmacy is the only one that can have a loss versus a significant loss, especially when you're counting by hand. Sometimes prescriptions, if it's supposed to have 100 tablets, may have 98, or they might have 102. So this is why it's so important for you to maintain a perpetual inventory. When you maintain a perpetual inventory, you're always going to know how much you have on hand. But if you don't maintain it and you do that biannual inventory, you have no idea what you're supposed to have on hand. You're just putting down the quantities that you have at that moment. But it doesn't tell you that you might be short 1 or 2 tablets, or you might be short 100 tablets. You know, and this is why I always say, forget about, you know, estimating, and yes, do a perpetual inventory, because whether you know, a lot of pharmacies, what they do is they keep it for Schedule 2s, but not 3, 4s, and 5s. So I always tell pharmacists, well, if you have no idea what you're supposed to have on hand, your technicians, your pharmacy techs, and your other pharmacists know you ain't keeping a record. So they can take 100 tablets and you will never know the difference. You know, and this is why tramadol is, to me, the #1 drug on Schedule 4 that is diverted, because pharmacies don't have any inventory, or they're estimating, and they really don't know the actual quantities. And when you're doing it on a biannual inventory, you know, you have to do an exact count, even if it takes you a bit of time, but you have to do an exact count, because DEA is going to use that as their initial inventory. And you're either going to come up short or you're going to go over. And like I said, you know, being short, it's diversion in the eyes of DEA. Being over, it's record keeping. And the violation, the fine for a record keeping violation, a civil fine, it's $15,691. So
it's a popular number. I remember you going over this for the waste management.
Right. Well, you know, the thing is, I was just on the DEA diversion website, you know, yesterday. I mean, I go in this 4 times a week, if not 5, but except on Saturday and Sunday, unless I'm doing a report, you know, but what was I saying? Oh, so I looked at the 842, it's Title 21 United States Code 842. Okay, that's the civil fine. In they can cite you. In A5 is for controlled substances. A10 is for your pseudoephedrine products. And what talks about that you have to keep accurate records, all right, or your failure to maintain complete and accurate records. And the fine is still listed as 10,000. You know, but it's not, because what happened back in 2016, what they did is they started adding more because of not cost of living, the cost of living factor, you know. So it went from 10,000 to now it's $15,691. Okay, so keep that in mind. So for every one of those drugs that you're over, and for each one of those drugs that you're under, multiply that times 15,691, and that's the civil fine that occurs. And and usually the civil fines come through the U.S. attorneys, the local U.S. attorney's office. Now, administratively, DEA can do a letter of admonition or a memorandum of agreement. Okay, but the violation is complete failure to maintain complete and accurate inventory. And then, because you have no idea what you have, now you fail to maintain an effective security program to prevent the theft and loss of controlled substances. Because if you have no idea of what you have on hand, therefore there is no security, right? And that's the second charge. Okay, multiply that times 15,691. So I've done many computation charts, just like DEA does, and I find sometimes that it's really ugly. You know, when you have a pharmacy losing 60,000 or 62,000 dosage units over a 2-year period, there's something wrong there. Okay. Yeah. And the reason why many times is they're not keeping an accurate
Is it
inventory.
because of the estimation, or is it because of like what you had illustrated earlier, people taking their inventory in the middle of the day versus closing and opening?
That too, but when you get to 60,000, most likely is you weren't keeping an inventory at all. You have no idea.
And then there was major theft going on.
And that there was major theft going on because you weren't keeping an inventory.
Right.
You know, and if you're estimating, you know, on the estimated part, or when they do the computation, you're over by 120 tablets. Well, you know, you dispensed 10,000. Okay, so most likely it's going to be less than 0.5%. I normally say, listen, on something like that, I would attribute that to the manual dispensing. Okay, so, or if they're short, it could be because they added too many tablets in a prescription, or if they're over, it's because they didn't add the quantities of the required dosage units in a prescription. So less than 0.5%, I would attribute that to. But if you start talking about 5%, 10%, I mean, I've seen as far as 62%.
Wow.
Okay? I know. Then I was like, wow, you know, I had to go back and I did that computation 3 times, right? I got the records out again and went through it.
But what did they say?
Oh, I didn't know. I didn't know. That's what he said. I didn't know that they were stealing. That
Are there, you know how the FDA publishes 483s, and certain companies can go all through all the 483s and find trends, and does the DEA publish any kind of information on, you know, on citations?
No, they don't. They maintain that as in-house information. They don't provide it to anyone. The only time they announce anything is because they have to do a federal register announcing, okay, the revocation. So if you go onto the DEA diversion website and you look up cases against doctors, it's on the right side of the website, down in the middle. It's not only revocations of DEA registrations for physicians, but there's also manufacturers, distributors, researchers, clinics, and so forth, you know, and pharmacies. And many a times, you know, it's because of the due diligence, you know, the dispensing with and not complying with the corresponding responsibility of a pharmacist when they're filling prescriptions. In essence, they become pill mills.
Yeah.
And you'll see that. And usually, many a times you'll see that with the idea that they weren't keeping a good inventory at all, you know? So, I mean, especially for an internal theft, we had, and again, I mean, I can't say this any more than forget what the regulation says about estimated count. Okay, don't, because what's going to happen on the other end of that computation chart, you're either going to be over, which is a record keeping violation, or you're going to be under, which is a diversion in the eyes of DEA. You know, there's a theft here because your numbers are a negative number. All right, then that's when the civil fine comes into play, or it can be an administrative action taken by DEA, which means that they gave you an opportunity before. Now they come back and they find the same violations. Now they go into an order, show cause, to take, you know, to revoke your registration and with the allegations. But I do so many pharmacy thefts. I mean, you would not believe. I mean, I'm going down this month alone. I had 1, 2, 3. Just this month alone, right now, I have 3. I got 2 that I'm going down at the beginning of December, 2 pharmacies that had thefts, and I'm waiting for them to give me the information I need so I can do a computation chart, you know, and generally what happens is the DEA would do a closing inventory. So they provide the registrant that copy, and the registrant has a DEA biannual inventory. So I use that as the initial inventory. Then all I would need is dispensing records, purchases, and anything that they send back to the reverse distributor for destruction, or any theft or any loss on the 106, DEA form 106. And then I do a computation chart. But I mean, you know, the other thing is when they're doing the biannual inventory, you know, you can't believe what I see. I see a white sheet of paper, they write the drug, and then they do a number in green or they do a number in red. What does that mean? Well, it means that red, they're short, and green, that they're over, right? And then they use that as the format to give to DEA. So DEA looks at the sheet, looks like a Christmas tree, okay? It's a white sheet with green and red all over, you know? And I tell pharmacists all the time, that's your worksheet, all right? Take that sheet and put it in an Excel format or some kind of, you know, or write it out nicely if you want. Make sure you keep your Schedule 2 separate from your 3, 4s, and 5s, and put in the amounts, you know. Do it as what the DEA regulation requires it. Don't give DEA the green and red sheets, because now they're going to say, okay, what does red mean? Oh, I was short. What does green mean? Oh, I was over. Okay, very good. Now they're going to take each one of them, multiply times $15,691. And that's what you're looking at. And then on top of that, you're also going to be cited for not having, you know, a biannual inventory in the format that DEA requires. So we throw in another $15,691. So your checkbook, and I tell pharmacies all the time, I just did one for a pharmacy group Saturday. And it was funny. I had about 100 pharmacists out there. And I tell them, when I said to them, don't give DEA your Christmas tree, you know, I explained them what the Christmas tree was like. They were laughing and they all knew, and some of them are nodding their head, you know, like
going, that's what they do.
Yeah, that's what I do, you know, and they'll take the sheet that they used it and just put the information that's required, you know, but they commingle their Schedule 2s and their 3, 4s, and 5. So remember one thing, it's perpetual inventory versus continuous inventory. DEA says you're not required to maintain a perpetual inventory, but you are required to maintain a continuous inventory. And then the other thing is an exact count versus as an estimated count. All right. DEA says you can estimate for Schedule 3, 4s, and 5s, but when you estimate, you're going to be short,
right,
on your estimations, or you're going to be over.
Right.
Now you have overages and shortages. Multiply that, each one of them times 15,691, and that's your count. So remember, exact count, yes. Estimated count, no. Okay. And perpetual inventory, yes. I don't care what DEA says. All right. You're required to maintain a continuous inventory, which is a perpetual inventory. With that, I'm done.